London, 1815. The city gleamed beneath a thin veil of frost, its lamplighters moving like ghosts through the fog that curled along the cobblestones. Inside the Duchess of Wycliffe's grand ballroom, chandeliers burned with relentless brilliance, their crystals catching the swirl of music and murmured gossip that filled the gilded air. It was the first grand affair of the winter season, and all of society had gathered beneath those glittering ceilings to watch the dance of power, wealth, and ruin. Among the sea of silk and powdered wigs, Lady Evelina Harcourt stood at the threshold, her gloved hands trembling against the folds of her pale gown. The fabric, an altered relic from a happier time, betrayed its age in the dim candlelight. Whispers preceded her like a chilling wind. The daughter of a disgraced man, whispered the women behind their fans. The girl whose father had embezzled crown funds and fled the inquiry before taking his own life. The fallen debutante. The room seemed to hum with a cruel pleasure at her reappearance. Evelina drew a shallow breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the ballroom. Heads turned. A violinist missed a note. To her right, a young viscount whispered something behind his gloved hand, and his companion's laughter rang out, sharp as broken glass. Still, she curtsied to the Duchess, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Your Grace," she murmured. "It is an honor to be invited." The Duchess of Wycliffe regarded her with the polite indifference reserved for those whom society had already condemned. "Indeed," she replied, her fan flicking open like a blade. "It is good to see courage still survives in unfortunate families." That single word, unfortunate, was enough to draw faint smirks from the gathering. Evelina felt the air thicken with scorn. Her throat tightened, but she held her poise. She had promised herself she would not weep again in public. Her father's sins would not be her undoing. She moved through the crowd like a ghost at her own funeral, greeting those who dared meet her eye. Some responded with brittle civility, others with perfumed contempt. Only one figure in the room seemed entirely unmoved by the spectacle, the Duke of Ashbourne, standing near the hearth, tall and reserved, his expression unreadable. His dark hair was threaded with the faintest trace of silver, his black tailcoat immaculate, his posture commanding without effort. He was a man known for his discipline, his loyalty to the crown, and the cold precision with which he kept the world at bay. Widowed 3 years, he was both admired and feared for his unyielding composure. When their eyes met, it lasted scarcely a heartbeat, but Evelina felt it, a flicker of awareness, neither pity nor curiosity, something quieter and far more dangerous, understanding. The night moved on, heavy with gossip. Beneath the chandeliers, couples danced to a waltz that seemed almost cruel in its elegance. Evelina stood by the refreshment table, her fan motionless. Behind her, a cluster of ladies exchanged low laughter. One voice, distinct and venomous, rose above the rest, Lady Montgomery. "Poor dear Evelina," she purred, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Her father may have stolen from the crown, but surely she need not steal her gown from the dead." The laughter that followed was merciless. Evelina's hand trembled. Her vision blurred. Before she could respond, the Duchess's butler appeared at her elbow. "My lady," he said softly, "a carriage waits outside. The prince's advisers request your presence." Her pulse faltered. She followed him through the corridors, past portraits of long-dead nobility, until she reached a small chamber lit by the cold glow of a single candelabrum. There, 3 men awaited her, each dressed in sober black, each carrying the weary authority of those who spoke not for themselves but for the crown. "Lady Evelina," one began, voice measured, "your reappearance this evening has caused comment. His Royal Highness fears renewed attention upon your late father's affairs. It is the crown's wish to preserve dignity for all parties." Her fingers clenched around the folds of her skirt. "You wish me to disappear?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The eldest adviser exchanged a glance with the others. "Disappear? No. Quite the opposite. You are to marry." The word struck like a blow. He continued, almost kindly. "The Duke of Ashbourne has agreed to the arrangement. His Grace's reputation is beyond reproach. Your union will silence speculation and restore stability to your family name. It is a measure of mercy, Lady Evelina. I suggest you accept it." She could not breathe. The Duke of Ashbourne, her savior and her sentence. A man who did not know her, who owed her nothing. "And if I refuse?" The advisor's gaze hardened. "Then you will find yourself without allies. Or future." Evelina felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Outside, the carriages rattled on the frozen cobblestones, oblivious to the quiet undoing of a life. She bowed her head. "Then I accept." Days later, beneath the cold stone arches of St. George's Chapel, she stood beside the Duke. No choir sang, no petals fell. Only the soft echo of their vows lingered in the air like fading smoke. The Duke's voice was calm, distant, each word spoken as though from behind glass. Evelina, pale and trembling, repeated her lines with quiet obedience. When it was done, he offered her his arm. Their eyes met briefly, polite, restrained, and they walked together through the empty nave, their footsteps hollow against the marble floor. Outside, the snow fell thick and unrelenting. The carriage ride to Ashbourne House passed in silence. She gazed out the window, watching the white world blur past, her thoughts a whirl of disbelief. The man beside her might as well have been carved from stone. He offered no words, no comfort, no promise, only a presence that seemed to command stillness itself. When they arrived, the servants bowed, their faces unreadable. The great hall of Ashbourne was a cathedral of shadows, tall ceilings, portraits veiled in dust, and the faint scent of extinguished fire. The Duke handed her a small envelope. "Your allowance will be arranged by morning," he said. His voice was even, almost gentle, yet utterly impersonal. "If you require anything, inform Mrs. Redley. She oversees the household." Evelina nodded, unsure what else to do. "Yes, Your Grace." He inclined his head. "Good night, my lady." And then he was gone, up the grand staircase, his footsteps fading into the silence. Evelina stood alone, her breath visible in the cold air. The vastness of the house seemed to swallow her whole. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight. When she finally entered her room, she found a single white rose laid across her pillow, its petals pure, untouched by frost. No note accompanied it, no explanation. Only the faintest trace of his cologne lingered in the air. She touched the flower gently, her throat tightening. Perhaps it was nothing, an empty gesture, a courtesy extended by habit. Yet something within her refused to dismiss it. For the first time since her father's death, a fragile flicker of warmth stirred within her chest. Outside, snow began to fall once more, blanketing the silent grounds of Ashbourne in white. And as Evelina lay awake beneath the canopy of her new life, she could not help but wonder whether this marriage of appearances might, in time, unearth something far more dangerous than disgrace, something perilously close to hope. Outside, snow began to fall once more, blanketing the silent grounds of Ashbourne in white. And as Evelina lay awake beneath the canopy of her new life, she could not help but wonder whether this marriage of appearances might, in time, unearth something far more dangerous than disgrace, something perilously close to hope. The weeks following the quiet wedding unfolded like the turning of a restrained melody, each note deliberate, each silence heavier than the last. Ashbourne House, vast and dignified, echoed with footsteps but not laughter. Its marble corridors smelled faintly of lavender and thyme, portraits of past dukes observed from their gilt frames, judging with unblinking eyes. Lady Evelina moved among them as a guest within her own life. Her mornings were spent in the conservatory, tending to hothouse roses that bloomed without scent, and her evenings beneath the chandeliered dining hall where she and the Duke dined in polite, echoing silence. The Duke was courteous but remote. His words came measured, never careless, his gaze unflinching but never intimate. Yet there were gestures, subtle, fleeting, that unsettled her composure. A chair pulled before she could reach it. A cloak draped upon her shoulders during a frost-bitten walk. A book of verse left upon her writing desk, Wordsworth, the very poet she had once whispered over candlelight in her girlhood. These tokens were as perplexing as they were tender, suggesting a man who cared and did not wish to be caught caring. One evening, she found upon her vanity a velvet box containing the late Duchess's emerald necklace. Its hue, deep and alive, seemed to pulse against the pale light. Inside lay a note written in his hand. "It would suit you if you wish it. No flourish, no sentiment, yet something in the restrained simplicity felt dangerously intimate. She traced the elegant handwriting with trembling fingers, unsure whether the gesture was kindness or burden. Outside the walls of Ashbourne, however, London's appetite for scandal was never sated. Though the marriage had silenced whispers for a time, curiosity persisted. It was said that the Duke pitied his bride, that she had snared him by royal intervention, that her father's blood still tainted the union. Evelina bore the rumors with composed indifference, but at night she lay awake, wondering whether the Duke had heard them too, and whether he regretted his vow. Then came the invitation, a masquerade at Carlton House, hosted by the Prince Regent himself. It was an honor few dared decline, and fewer still survived unscathed. The Duchess's maid delivered the gilded envelope one morning while frost still clung to the window-panes. Evelina hesitated as she read the flowing script. To appear would mean exposure, to refuse would signal guilt. When she showed the invitation to her husband, he studied it in silence before replying, "You are the Duchess of Ashbourne. You will attend." The night of the masquerade arrived beneath a flurry of snow. Evelina's gown, of deep emerald silk, shimmered like the heart of a forest beneath candlelight. Her hair, pinned with jewels, framed her face in soft curls. When she descended the staircase, the Duke turned from the hearth to regard her fully. For a moment, the measured calm of his features faltered. "You look," he began quietly, as though uncertain he should finish the thought, "exactly as I had hoped." The carriage ride to Carlton House was wordless, save for the rhythmic clatter of hooves upon the icy road. When they entered the palace, warmth and splendor engulfed them. Crystal chandeliers reflected in gold mirrors, an orchestra waltzing beneath painted ceilings, hundreds of guests masked in satin and intrigue. Evelina felt every eye follow her through the crowd, the emerald gown blazing like a challenge amidst a sea of white and silver. For a time, she played her part. She curtsied, she smiled, she endured polite conversation. Yet beneath the mask, her heart thudded like a captive bird. The Duke drifted between circles of statesmen, his presence commanding quiet respect. From across the ballroom, their eyes met, briefly, almost unwillingly, and in that instant she felt the fragile thread of connection neither could name nor deny. It was near midnight when the laughter began, soft at first, like the rustle of silk, then growing sharper, unmistakable. A gentleman in naval dress held aloft a folded paper, his voice carrying above the music. "It seems," he said with theatrical delight, "that the Duchess of Ashbourne once enjoyed correspondence with a certain Colonel Whitby before his unfortunate court-martial. Touching, is it not, that she kept his letters still?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Evelina's blood turned to ice. Colonel Whitby. The name was familiar only as another casualty of rumor, a man she had met but twice, and never alone. She felt the weight of every gaze upon her, the burn of whispers slicing through the air like glass. The forged letter passed from hand to hand, its false words dripping with implication. Lady Montgomery's laughter rose above the rest. "How tragic," she sighed dramatically, "that his Grace should learn his Duchess's affections are so easily misplaced." Evelina stood frozen, the room spinning. Her vision blurred at the edges as humiliation pressed upon her chest like a vice. She turned instinctively toward her husband, who stood several paces away, unreadable beneath his mask. For a terrible moment, she believed he would turn his back, as society demanded, to preserve his name from hers. Instead, the Duke crossed the floor. His stride was measured, his silence deafening. Conversations faltered, the orchestra stilled. The sea of silk and jewels parted before him. When he reached her, he paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly before settling upon her trembling form. With deliberate care, he removed his mask and let it fall to the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He took her gloved hand in his voice calm but commanding. "If this is the game you would play," he said, his tone cutting through the murmurs, "then let me make the first move." And before the Prince Regent, before every watchful noble and whispering tongue, he drew her close and kissed her. It was not the chaste courtesy of a husband preserving decorum. It was defiance wrapped in tenderness, a claim that dared society itself to protest. The ballroom erupted into stunned silence. Evelina's breath caught, her pulse wild beneath her ribs. She felt the warmth of his hand at her waist, the steadiness of his resolve. When he drew back, his words were low but clear enough for all to hear. "If she is disgraced," he said, "then let her disgrace be mine also." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then came a rustle of astonished applause from somewhere near the orchestra, hesitant but sincere. Faces turned, some scandalized, some moved, some perhaps envious. Evelina could hardly comprehend it. She could only stare at him, her husband, this inscrutable man who had just shattered the sacred etiquette of their world to shield her from ruin. He guided her from the ballroom without another word. Behind them, the music resumed, quieter now, as if uncertain whether celebration or surrender had taken place. Outside, the snow had thickened into a soft, unending veil. The carriage awaited, lanterns glowing dimly against the white. Inside the quiet warmth, Evelina found her voice at last. "Why?" she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. "Why would you do such a thing?" He turned toward the window, his profile sharp against the glow. "Because," he said simply, "I would not have you stand alone in their cruelty." The words lingered, heavy and fragile. She looked down at their joined hands. His gloved fingers still wrapped around hers, and felt the smallest spark of something she had not known in years. Safety. The carriage wheels turned, carrying them back through the snow toward Ashbourne, leaving behind a ballroom still whispering of the scandal that, for the first time, had not destroyed her, but transformed her into something the world could neither pity nor ignore. Ashbourne lay wrapped in winter silence, its gardens entombed beneath sheets of frost that glittered like crushed diamonds beneath the morning sun. In the days following the masquerade, the world beyond their gates buzzed with rumor, yet within the manor walls, time itself seemed to hold its breath. The Duke of Ashbourne had not spoken of that fateful kiss, nor of the scandal it had silenced. He carried himself as he always had, measured, reserved, unassailable, yet something had shifted between them, something neither dared name. Evelina often found herself watching him in unguarded moments. In the library, where he read by the fire with spectacles balanced upon his nose. In the garden, where he paused before the frozen fountain as though listening for something long lost. His silence no longer felt indifferent. It carried weight, an unspoken acknowledgment of what they both now shared. Still, the air between them trembled with uncertainty, their new-found closeness as fragile as the ice blooming upon the windows. Her days unfolded quietly. She tended to the household's letters, arranged the servants' tasks, and walked the grounds wrapped in her green shawl. The world outside their estate regarded her differently now. Some praised her grace under humiliation, others whispered that the Duke's impulsive display had been an act of guilt, not affection. Evelina told herself she cared little for either version, yet each whisper seemed to settle like snow upon her heart, cold and heavy. One evening, as dusk bled into indigo, she found the Duke in the drawing-room, standing beside the fire. The room was bathed in amber light. Shadows of the flames danced across the carved wood panels. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You are restless," he observed quietly. She hesitated. "I find myself uncertain of my place here," she admitted. "I was meant to be your convenience." "And yet," she faltered, the confession catching in her throat, "yet you have defended me as though I mattered." He turned to the fire, his jaw tightening. "Does that surprise you?" "Yes," she said simply. "It surprises me more than I can express." The silence that followed was long, yet not uncomfortable. He poured 2 glasses of wine and offered her one. "You were wrong," he said finally. "You are not my convenience. You are my correction." Her eyes lifted in confusion. He smiled faintly, a small, almost painful gesture. "I have lived my life obeying the laws of propriety, guarding appearances, preserving honor. And yet, I found myself married to a woman who, by all accounts, should have ruined me, and instead, she has reminded me what it means to feel human again." Evelina's heart quickened. "You speak as if you regret the life you've led." "I regret only its emptiness," he murmured. "My first marriage was dutiful. My title became my master. And I wore my reputation like armor until it began to suffocate me. Then came you." His gaze met hers, steady and searching. "You, who were mocked and humiliated, yet bowed to no one. You carry yourself with more grace than any courtier in London. Tell me, Lady Evelina, how could I not defend you? Her breath caught. She had imagined kindness, perhaps obligation, but never admiration. She turned from him, suddenly shy beneath his gaze. The flames painted her face in soft gold, her eyes glistening with something perilously close to tears. I do not know how to live in a world that judges every heartbeat, she whispered. Since my father's disgrace, I have lived only to endure. The Duke set down his glass and stepped closer. Then endure no longer. His voice softened. You have suffered the cruelty of whispers long enough. Let this house be your refuge. Her composure trembled. And what of you? He regarded her for a long moment. I would rather be condemned for compassion than praised for cruelty. The words hung between them, fragile and alive. She felt her pulse race beneath her collarbone. It was the first time he had spoken without restraint, the first time the weight of his self-discipline seemed to fracture. Slowly, she extended her hand toward him. You once said our marriage was necessity, she murmured. Tell me, Your Grace, has that changed? He did not answer at once. Instead, he reached out, taking her hand with deliberate care. It has, he said, voice low, though I fear I cannot say what it has become. For a long while, they stood like that, two solitary figures in the glow of firelight, bound by silence and the faint tremor of possibility. The orchestra of the storm outside played softly against the windows, snow falling like forgotten confessions. Later, restless with thoughts she could not quiet, Evelina wandered into the conservatory. The glass panes shimmered with frost. Moonlight spilled across the dormant roses. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, lost in the hush of the night. Then, from behind her, she heard footsteps. The Duke stood at the threshold, his expression unreadable, his voice a low murmur. You should not walk alone at this hour. I could not sleep, she replied, turning to face him. The silence of this place, it feels alive, as though it listens. He stepped closer, his breath visible in the chill. Perhaps it listens because it waits, he said. For what? For what must finally be spoken? He stopped before her, so near she could see the faint glint of candlelight reflected in his eyes. You think I kissed you to preserve appearances, he said softly. But that was not duty. It was defiance. It was desire long denied. Evelina's lips parted, but no words came. Her heart thundered in her chest. The Duke's composure, so long unshaken, faltered as his voice deepened. You are not the woman the world thinks you are. And I am not the man they believe me to be. I am weary of this cold performance, of living by the measure of others' eyes. Her throat tightened. Then why keep me at a distance still? He looked away, jaw tense. Because I do not wish to destroy the one good thing that has come from my restraint. She stepped closer until only inches separated them. Then let me choose what I risk, she whispered. For once, let it be mine to decide. The snow outside fell heavier now, veiling the garden in white. The world beyond that glass seemed impossibly far away. The Duke reached for her hand again, his fingers trembling slightly as he brushed her knuckles with his thumb. If I speak what is in my heart, he said, I cannot take it back. Then speak, she whispered, and let it be truth. He drew a breath, the words almost a confession. I love you, Evelina. The silence that followed was vast and holy. Her breath caught, her eyes shining with disbelief. Then, slowly, she lifted his hand and pressed it to her heart. And I, she began, voice trembling, have loved you since the night you placed that rose upon my pillow. The firelight flickered, the frost upon the windows beginning to melt in thin, glistening veins. The Duke exhaled softly, as though releasing years of restraint. He reached for the chain around her neck, the emerald pendant that had once belonged to his late wife, and unfastened it gently. In its place, he slid his own signet ring onto the chain. Let the world keep its titles, he said. You are the only honor I desire to bear. Evelina felt tears warm her cheeks as the snow continued to fall. The walls of Ashbourne seemed to exhale with them, shedding their old silence. And though no vow was spoken, something irrevocable bound them there, in the winter garden, beneath the ghostly light of the moon, where love had finally dared to breathe its first true name. Morning arrived pale and trembling, its light filtering through the frost-laced windows of Ashbourne like a whispered secret. The storm had passed, but the world beyond lay buried under snow so deep it silenced even the crows. Evelina woke with her heart still fluttering from the memory of the night before, the Duke's voice, low and certain, declaring love as though exhaling a long-held breath. She lay still, feeling the ring upon her chain, the warmth of it against her skin anchoring her to something fragile yet real. But reality, she knew, was a fickle guest in houses like theirs. By midday, a carriage arrived from London. Its wheels cracked the frozen earth like thunder. The seal upon the envelope it bore gleamed crimson and gold, the mark of the crown. The Duke broke it open before the hearth, his expression hardening as his eyes moved across the page. Evelina stood nearby, her fingers tightening around her shawl. "What is it?" she asked softly. He lowered the letter with a sigh that carried the weight of duty long endured. "The Queen summons me to Windsor. There are questions about our marriage. About you." Her stomach sank. "Questions." "Whispers," he corrected. "They say the marriage was an act of desperation. That I wed you to preserve my name after you disgraced yours." The words stung, even though she had expected them. "And what will you tell them?" "The truth," he said simply, though his tone betrayed unease. "That my name was never the thing I sought to preserve." Evelina turned away, her pulse quickening. "They will not believe that. They will believe what suits them best." He crossed the room and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then let them believe what they will. I will not renounce what is now part of my very soul." Still, she saw in his eyes the shadow of apprehension. Love had made him brave, but the world he inhabited had teeth. By the next dawn he was gone, his carriage vanishing into the pale horizon, leaving her alone with the echo of his promise. The days that followed stretched into aching silence. Letters from London arrived with polite formalities but no comfort. The servants, loyal yet uneasy, spoke in hushed tones. Evelina walked the empty halls and wondered whether love could withstand the weight of scrutiny. She thought of the Duke amid the glittering hostility of Windsor's court, surrounded by the very voices that had scorned her. She imagined his calm resolve, his measured words, and the fragile truth they both risked by daring to care. One afternoon, as snow gave way to slush, a carriage approached once more. But it was not the Duke who stepped down. It was Lady Agatha Linton, his cousin, her expression as sharp as her attire. Evelina met her in the drawing-room, every instinct braced for battle. "Lady Ashbourne," Agatha began, her tone smooth as silk, "I come at his Grace's request. He fears you will not hear the truth if it comes from his pen." Evelina's breath caught. "The truth." Agatha sat, crossing one gloved leg over the other. "The Queen has ordered an inquiry. They intend to determine whether your marriage was lawful, whether it was entered in good faith or as concealment of scandal." Evelina's composure wavered. "Concealment." Agatha's eyes softened slightly. "You know how the crown guards appearances. The Duke defied expectation when he married you. Many thought it rebellion. Others," she paused, "call it love. That distinction, it seems, now interests Her Majesty." The fire cracked softly between them. Evelina clasped her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "And what does the Duke say?" "He says he will not yield. That if the court demands proof of his affection, he will stand before them and speak it himself." Her heart ached with both pride and fear. "He would sacrifice his standing for me?" Agatha's gaze softened. "He already has. And now you must decide whether you will let him lose everything, or whether you will save him from it." The choice struck her like cold air. "You mean annulment," she whispered. "I mean mercy," Agatha replied quietly. A single statement, signed and sealed, that the marriage was one of convenience, nothing more. It would protect his title. It would preserve what little peace you both have left. Evelina rose abruptly, turning toward the frost-clouded window. "And what of love?" Is that to be erased with ink? Agatha's silence was her answer. When she finally departed, Evelina stood long after the door had closed, staring at the table where the unsigned paper lay, a lifeless thing that could unmake everything she had come to believe was real. That night, unable to rest, she wandered into the Duke's study. The scent of him lingered: leather, ink, faint smoke. Upon his desk lay a half-finished letter, the wax seal still unpressed. She hesitated, then read, **, if they demand I renounce her, they demand I renounce the man I have become. I will not. **. Her tears fell silently onto the parchment. Love, she realized, was not the absence of sacrifice, it was the will to bear it. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her heart. When dawn came, she summoned her carriage. The journey to Windsor was long and bitter, snow clinging to the roads like ghosts unwilling to let go. As the castle's spires rose from the mist, she steeled herself for what she must do. Inside the great hall, the Duke stood before the Queen's council, his head held high though the air bristled with judgment. When Evelina entered, every whisper ceased. She met his gaze across the marble floor, and in that look, the world fell away. Her voice, when it came, was steady. *Your Majesty,*' she said, curtsying low, *the Duke of Ashbourne's honor is without blemish. If fault lies anywhere, it is mine. I married not for title or station, but because I loved him before I knew him. And if love is a crime in your eyes, then I confess my guilt freely.'' The chamber stirred. The Queen's sharp gaze softened just enough to be seen. *You speak boldly, Lady Ashbourne,'* she said. *Because truth demands boldness,'' Evelina replied. *And I will not let it die in silence.'' The Duke stepped forward then, his voice deep and unwavering. *Your Majesty, you need no further inquiry. My wife has spoken truth enough for us both.'' The Queen regarded them for a long, measured moment before inclining her head. *Then let the matter rest,'' she declared. *England thrives not only upon law, but upon the courage of those who defy it with grace.'' The hall exhaled as if released from a spell. Evelina felt her knees weaken, but the Duke's arm was suddenly there, steadying her. He looked at her as though seeing the sunrise for the first time. When they emerged into the courtyard, snow began to fall once more, soft, endless, forgiving. He turned to her, his gloved hand brushing a tear from her cheek. *You came for me,'' he murmured. She smiled faintly. *I came for us.'' He drew her close, the cold forgotten. *Then let the world speak what it will,'' he said. *For I am done living by their measure.'' And as the snow gathered upon their shoulders, two hearts, once burdened by duty and disgrace, beat freely at last, unguarded beneath the open sky, while the bells of Windsor tolled like a benediction for love that had endured its trial and emerged, impossibly, redeemed.